Good morning, I'm Greg Krasovsky, I'm an attorney, and today I wanted to talk to you about labor law, both domestic and international labor law, and the legal services that my law offices offer in these fields. In the United States, Russia, other countries of the former Soviet Union, and other locations. We offer these services both to employees and employers. So chances are you've been an employee at least once in your life. If you feel that your rights as an employee have been violated by your employer, even if you have suspicions or inklings, give us a call. You can always describe to us your situation. Usually the first 50 minutes of any legal consultation are free. So you get a chance to talk to us, to me or one of my colleagues, and let us know what happened, and we'll let you know whether we can help you. We offer labor law services both with our own lawyers and in conjunction with other law firms that we work with all around the world in various countries. And this is especially relevant today since a lot of people work for international employers. Employers whose parent companies may be based in a different country, or employers that have subsidiaries in other countries, or affiliates, or employees who end up spending some of their time in other countries, either on business trips or in temporary or even long-term assignments. So if you have an issue with your employer regarding compensation, benefits, we're talking about vacation time, medical insurance benefits. If you're an expat or someone who's stationed abroad, you may be entitled to a housing allowance, transportation allowances, relocation allowances. So if you feel that someone's not treating you right or they're not fulfilling the terms of your contract, then talk to us. Speaking of labor and employer contracts, you know the regular advice that you'll get from any competent and experienced labor lawyer. Before you sign any labor contract, as an employee, show it to a lawyer. Remember, it's worth to spend a couple of $100, maybe even more, to have a competent, experienced attorney review it for you and give you suggestions of what should be added or what should be removed from the contract, either for an employee or as a contractor. This is another one of the recent tendencies that we see in the labor market. Lots of people are not being hired as employees anymore. They're being hired as contractors, or what are the different popular words today? Freelancers. Well, listen, it's nice to be a freelancer, but I think all of us enjoy regular pay and fair labor benefits, because you may have the flexibility of working from your couch or your local Starbucks or other cafe or restaurant. But if you're not getting medical coverage, if you're not entitled to vacation pay or other benefits that traditional employees have been used to, then you may want to think about it. And also see whether you can address these issues in your contract as a contractor by requesting additional compensation. If you're an employer, regardless of whether you're a corporation, a company that's a small business, or even a sole proprietor that employs individuals, before you sign a contract with an employee, talk to us. Talk to us before you start interviewing potential employees or potential contractors. Because during those interviews, you may say certain things that could be used against you by the potential employee or contractor, even if you ended up not hiring them or giving them any sort of work or contract. If you're involved in international work, international business transactions, international activities, and you're going to send your employees abroad for a business trip, for negotiations, for some sort of a trade or other professional conference, you have to understand your potential liabilities and how you can mitigate them in terms of the paperwork that needs to be filled out with employees or contractors, the insurance that you need to obtain, the legal opinions that you need to obtain to make sure that you're fully in compliance both with your local laws and the laws of the foreign jurisdiction where your employees are going or where your employees are working, including subsidiaries and affiliates. That's something to think about. If you're hiring contractors, and these contractors themselves end up using subcontractors to do work for you, you may be held responsible for certain violations of labor laws and labor regulations. As we know, over the last couple of years, we've had a number of scandals regarding sexual harassment, or harassment, as other people will say. And so you need to make sure that you have appropriate policies in place that will prevent these issues. And when these issues come up, when these episodes come up, you need to have proper reporting requirements, reporting mechanisms, proper investigation mechanisms to make sure that if you hear something about a potential case of harassment at work, any type of workplace harassment, doesn't have to be sexual, is properly addressed, and you have the appropriate legal advice from your lawyers. Workplace injuries, serious issue. Or let's say damage has been done to third parties by your employees within their course of conduct as employees for you, their course of work, or by your contractors. Make sure you talk to a lawyer and get a legal opinion. So labor law, as we've said in the beginning, deals with employees, deals with employers, and other third parties that are affected by this. So if you're an employee, you're an employer, or you're a third party that has been aggrieved by someone as part of an employee-employer relationship, talk to us to see whether we can help you. Protect your rights, and if you're entitled to compensation, to receive compensation. Also for employees, if you're having an issue with your employer over compensation, promotions, benefits, your areas of functional responsibilities, if you're starting to have disputes with your coworkers or bosses, and you feel people are trying to violate your rights, or to push you out, or to harass you, or apply financial pressure on you, psychological pressure, talk to us. We can give you advice on your options. And we can also explain to you whether the issue that you perceive is protected under the law, and whether there's a genuine legal issue on which we can help you. If you're an employer, same thing, or someone in a management position at a company, talk to us if you're starting to have issues with your employees. Obviously, you're going to seek the advice of your human resources department or your human resources officer. And chances are they'll give you good advice, because hopefully they know what they're doing in human resources and in labor law. But if they're not lawyers, then talk to a lawyer. Talking to in-house legal counsel is critical, but you also have to remember that the in-house legal counsel may not be there to protect you. He is there to protect the rights of the company. And he may have a conflict of interest. Or the issue that you approach this corporate legal counsel with may be an issue where the position of the company is diametrically opposed to your position. You guys may be adversaries. This is another reason why, if you are running into problems as an employee or as a manager, that you also talk to an attorney whose duty of loyalty is going to be to you, not to your employer, or not to any other adversary that you may have with your issue, whether it's someone in management who's above you, or whether it's an employee that reports to you. Regarding international labor laws, I mentioned before, you have to make sure that you're in compliance not just with local labor law in the home jurisdiction of your employer or where you're regularly based, but that you're also in compliance with local laws of the country where you go to for an assignment, for negotiations, or for a professional conference. We get cases like this all the time. Employees go somewhere and they run afoul of local laws. And then, even though they expect that their employer will provide them full legal support, sometimes it doesn't happen. They just, what's the expression? They just let you go under the bus. Or the employer may take the position that whatever you did falls outside of the employee-employee relationship, and because you violated local laws. And remember, anytime you're an employee for someone, violation of criminal law or civil law cannot be a part of your legal functional responsibilities. Just so it falls outside of the employer-employee relationship in that sense. This is another reason why you need to seek the advice of legal counsel. Regarding international labor law, another area that we haven't talked about yet are labor unions. I've always been a firm believer that employees have the right to unionize and to have collective representation and collective bargaining. If you feel or you see that your employer is penalizing you or harassing you or is considering firing you or using other disciplinary measures or other sorts of pressure mechanisms to prevent you from exercising your union rights or the right to try to unionize, give us a call. We'll put you in touch with, if we can't help you with something, with lawyers who work for labor unions and for federation associations of labor unions to make sure that your rights are protected. If you're an employer and you're dealing with an issue with organized labor, and you feel that organized labor is starting to abuse their right and starting to interfere with the rights that you have as an employer to manage your employees, to negotiate with your employees, also to discipline your employees, then give us a call. Especially if this involves labor laws and labor regulations in other countries that you may not be familiar with. So, like I said, the United States, Russia, other countries in the former Soviet Union, other European countries, and Asian countries. And we even have law firms that we work with in Africa. So if there's an employee-employee relationship on any continent, chances are we can try to help you out. We can help you out, either on our own or in conjunction with other people that I work with and my colleagues work with as well. I guess the last part of labor law that I'd like to discuss, aside from the international component, which is, I think, is very relevant today, is getting back to the relationship between an employee and an employer and a contractor. As I mentioned to you before, often it's easier for a company to hire as a contractor. You don't have to pay benefits. You don't have to make contributions to, for instance, unemployment payouts, depending on the jurisdiction. But sometimes what companies forget or like to conveniently ignore or mislabel is that the relationship actually isn't an employee-employer, isn't a contractor relationship, but an employee-employer one. So just because you're considered as a contractor, independent contractor, but you have very little independence in the work that you do for your client, you may actually have an employee-employer relationship with all ensuing legal ramifications that may work in your favor or may actually work against you, both in terms of civil law, criminal law, and including tax consequences. So talk to us about that. So if you're an employer and you've hired independent contractors, individuals, or maybe small companies that are owned by one individual, S corporations, pass-through LLCs that are providing routine, regular services for you under your direct management, what you may have is a situation where in the event some legal issue comes up in terms of liability, third-party claims, or tax law issues, you may discover that you've had an employee-employee relationship. It's also important to understand this from an immigration law point of view as well. Remember, as an employer, the last thing you want is to be on the hook for hiring illegal or undocumented workers. And often, just because you've hired someone as a contractor and you don't think you have any issues, or there aren't going to be any consequences for you because of their immigration status, you may be wrong. If under the law it turns out that you've had, in fact, and in law, an employee-employee relationship. So let's make sure that you don't suffer any civil penalties and fines, as well as potential criminal charges for hiring and harboring illegal aliens. And if you've already hired inappropriately, as far as the law is concerned, foreign labor, then talk to a lawyer. We'll let you know what you can do to try to mitigate your situation. If you're an employee or you're a contractor, and all of a sudden you're facing doing work for your client or your employer abroad, whether on a temporary assignment or on some sort of a business trip, talk to us to make sure that you don't inadvertently violate local immigration laws and that you're fully in compliance with them. Because even though formally your client or your employer should be responsible for helping you, legal fees and other things, at the end of the day, it may be you who ends up facing legal consequences for violation of local immigration laws. And these not only include administrative fines and potentially criminal fines, but also, and this is the worst, administrative detention or even detention in criminal proceedings. So you think you've taken a business trip or some sort of short and medium-term assignment abroad, and now you're sitting in a local detention facility for illegal immigrants. For all practical purposes, you're in jail, maybe immigration jail, and some of these immigration detention facilities are worse than jails. Jails, you get to have visitors periodically, right? In immigration facilities, often visits aren't even allowed. And who knows where they'll send you. Well, look at the situations people run into even within the U.S. system of immigration detention centers that are operated by private contractors. Same thing happens in other countries. So this is something you need to be aware of as well. So if you're an employee and you work for just a domestic employer, or your work entails or could potentially include work and trips abroad, or even activities abroad, make sure you talk to a lawyer. When I say even activities abroad, here's something for you to think about. Okay, you work for a local employer, and you guys sell products or services, not just domestically, but to other jurisdictions. And I'm not talking about another state in the United States, but other countries. Let's say some of your services or products are shipped or sold to in Mexico, in Canada, in Europe, former Soviet Union countries like Russia, Ukraine, the Baltic states, other countries. And all of a sudden, what you may not realize is if your employer is in violation of local laws, you as an employee may face not just civil liability, but criminal liability. And even after you quit your job, a year or two later, you may find out that, hey, there may even be an arrest warrant out for you in some other jurisdiction for what you did. And that's not interesting, especially when you go abroad on vacation, and heaven forbid, you're actually only wanted on an Interpol list. So that's something to think about. The other thing to think about in an international context, not just compliance with local immigration laws or with local consumer protection laws or other laws that you don't want to violate as an employee or a contractor or an employer. You may also want to think about potential violations of other statutes. For instance, we're talking about statutes relating to corruption and money laundering. So in the United States, we have the Foreign Corruption Practices Act. You don't want to violate them. Imagine if you go abroad on a trip, you're meeting with people. Some of the people you're meeting with, you may not even know, it may be people who have jobs in government, local municipal governments, on the level of a region or a city or equivalent of a county. And You take these guys out and you pay for someone's drink, or you pay for someone's lunch or dinner, or you give them a gift. Turns out you may have potentially violated local laws or U.S. laws because you've provided gifts that could be perceived as bribes under local or U.S. laws. So talk to us to make sure that even as an employee or as an employer, you're not running afoul of Foreign Corruption Practices Act. Money laundering is a big issue as well. We're not talking about laundering money because you're selling drugs or weapons or things like this. Money laundering, if you look at the formal technical definition, is anytime money is being transferred, exchanges hands, in violation of laws, or for activities that are illegal. So let's say you've shipped something to another country, whether a product that your company sells, and it turns out that under local laws, that sale was illegal because customs duties weren't paid, or the items were put in violation of customs laws and are considered customs contraband, or the particular item doesn't have all the necessary certificates, safety certificates or industry certificates, or requires licensing. So you could have had now an illegal transaction where you've sold a service or a product in violation of your laws or the other country's laws. And now, as a result of this illegal transaction, money is exchanging hands. The local customer or the contractor or the subcontractor is now paying you for an illegal service. That could be money laundering. And imagine if we're talking about international bank wire transfers or payments through international payment systems like PayPal, Western Union, MoneyGram. There are a whole bunch of different international payment service providers. You don't want to run afoul of money laundering laws. As an employee, same thing. Imagine if you're working somewhere abroad and it turns out that you're working in violation of local laws, or as a contractor, and now you're receiving compensation for what's considered to be illegal activity. And the receipt of this compensation or further transfers of this compensation could be considered money laundering. Didn't think about that, huh? So there are lots of things you need to think about, and this is why it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer. No, we're not paranoid, but we do want to think through all these potential consequences with you of international business activities or international labor law activities. So if you have a labor law issue or a related issue that arises out of a labor relationship, employee-employee relationship, or even a contractor-client relationship, then talk to us. We'll try to help you, give you good legal advice, minimize any legal liability, make sure that you're in compliance with local international laws. Thanks. Look forward to hearing from you.